comes on the adoption of the order by which Mr. Heck of Watertown offers an amendment in the hands of the clerk. Clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment number 1. Mr. Heck of Watertown moves to amend the order in Rule 33A by striking out the first paragraph and inserting in place of the following. Copies of all bills shall be available in the form in which they will be considered by the House to all members of the House and public at least 72 hours in advance of consideration. The House may consider a bill.
Chair hears no objection. The clerk will dispense with the further reading of the amendment. Chair hears none. Question comes on the adoption of the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the House. Good afternoon. It's an honor to speak with you here today from this rostrum at this, our first session of the 191st Grade and General Court. And I want to say it's truly an honor and a pleasure to be your colleague. I've been reading your bills, as many of them as I can, and I am impressed and I am inspired by your thoughtfulness and care in crafting those bills, and by what they say about the knowledge and the experience that you have in so many areas, by what they say about your commitment to your communities, to people in need, to causes that animate you and bring you to this House to serve. So I thank you so much. I've got a few bills too that I'm pretty excited about. Which brings us to the subject of today's session, the rules. The rules we will adopt today will go a long way to determining how all those important bills we have filed will be handled. They will go a long way to determining what opportunities you will have to educate the rest of us about those bills. They will go a long way to determining what opportunities we will have to learn from you and the constituents and advocates and experts you have worked with in crafting your bills. And they will go a long way to determining how much opportunity the public at large will have to understand what we, as their elected representatives, are doing, to engage with us, and to advocate for the things that make a difference in their lives. If done well, the rules should enable each and every one of us to play a meaningful and effective role in the legislative process. In short, good rules give you voice. And in giving you voice, and you voice, and you voice, and you voice, and you voice, we will ensure that the full range of diverse views, diverse experiences, and diverse communities that you represent will be heard. That is what democracy is about. That is what the legislative process is about. And I firmly believe that the end result of all of that will be more good laws. And that's why we're here. So let me move to this First Amendment. This amendment would provide members and the public 72 hours to review bills before they are taken up by the House. The current rule only provides for 24 hours, which is not adequate for many reasons. We have many long bills, we have many complicated bills, we have many bills that are long and complicated. Since there are so many bills, thousands of bills on so many subjects, members can't possibly be up to speed on all of them. Even where we may have familiarity with the subject matter or even with the bill itself, it may have changed significantly in the last stages of committee work before it comes to the floor. And of course, there are days when we take up several bills at once. These are all reasons why members need more than 24 hours to get ready to debate and vote. Just as important is that we allow enough time to hear from constituents. For them, 24 hours to hear about a bill, work to understand it, and communicate with us is not realistic at all. Oftentimes, the first thing they hear about a bill is when they read a newspaper report that we've already passed it. This proposed amendment would extend that time to 72 hours. If a need arose to move faster, the amendment would permit the members to waive the 72-hour requirement by a two-thirds roll call vote. A two-thirds roll call vote is not something new in our rules. For instance, Rule 12, which governs the preparation of the calendar by the clerk, provides that the clerk is only permitted to waive or forego preparing a calendar for a session if we, as a body, permit that by a two-thirds roll call vote. Again, having to do with information, notice to us, the ability for us to prepare and do our jobs. This two-thirds roll call vote used to actually be in the very rule, Rule 33A, that my amendment seeks to amend. That was when the rule was 24 hours, but for many years in this House, that 24-hour rule could only be waived on a two-thirds roll call vote. What would this amended rule mean in practical terms? Practically speaking, it would mean bills would be made available to us at the end of the day on Friday, which is the same time that the rules in Rule 7D provide that we receive notice of our schedule of sessions for the next week. Technically, it could be Sunday, but I think practically speaking, it would mean Friday. If leadership chooses to file an order regarding the filing of amendments, we could be informed of that as well on Friday. And that order could be entered at the Monday informal. Amendments would be filed by the date and time specified in the order, say on Tuesday at noon, Tuesday at 5. We would debate on Wednesday per usual. This is not complicated. In sum, it would allow us to do our jobs more effectively while giving the public a genuine opportunity to be informed and to inform us. I hope the amendment is adopted, and when a vote is taken on this matter, I ask that it be taken by a call of the yeas and nays.
Mr. Heck of Watertown moves that when a vote on this matter be taken by the call of the yeas and nays. Those joining with him will please rise. Monitors will return the count. Nays, the chair recognizes Mr. Rogers of Cambridge.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and through you to the members. I want to first say that I respect and admire that the gentleman from Watertown is trying to have a conversation about our rules, which we welcome. And I think this particular rule, though, we need to bear in mind a little bit more about how our process works here. Before a bill gets voted on, it's often been deliberated on for months. It goes to committee. Expert testimony is heard. All of us can go and testify. Then we can go talk to the chairs of the key committees. We just did an energy bill in the last session. As the gentleman from Lowell, who has the unfortunate situation of sitting next to me can attest, he heard from me constantly about that clean energy bill, no less than 12 times. I met with him in his office. I asked, could I bring constituents in, not his constituents, mine, to meet with him about the energy bill. He said, sure, bring them in. That's true of every bill. We hold public hearings. It goes through a second and a third reading. It's brought up. Amendments can be filed. Requiring 72 hours is going to dramatically slow the process unless the bill is introduced On a Monday, it means weekends. It could be staff being called in on weekends, members who have a 3-hour drive. And most importantly, 24 hours is ample time to read the bills, and you can call for a recess during session if you need to ask questions. You can call committee staff. The gentleman from Watertown mentioned that our constituents need time. I don't know about all of you, but I'm hearing constantly from constituents all the time. I publish my personal cell phone. They call me on my cell phone. I've heard from constituents all week. I'm getting constant emails. So by the time a bill comes to the floor, there has been tremendous public input. And therefore, while I believe the bill, the amendment is well-intentioned, I think it is unnecessary and, in fact, may do harm. And I have to say, I have our rules here. And under those rules, we passed paid family and medical leave that is sweeping, that is respected across the country. We have passed the highest minimum wage in the country. We passed a bill I introduced, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. We passed reforms to our marijuana law, and I got very involved in that debate, and sometimes to the chagrin of leadership. But I kept pushing for what I believed in. Members here can push and fight for what they believe in, and we do all the time. And so we have a strong record in this House, and we have a strong record using rules that are the same or substantially similar to what we have now. For those reasons, I oppose the amendment. Thank you.
Question comes up on the adoption of the amendment. The chair recognizes Mr. Wagner of Chicopee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to our colleagues, I rise in opposition to the amendment. I have a good deal of respect for my colleague from Watertown who offered it. The perspective I would offer in opposition to it is that as a legislative body considering, as the gentleman from Watertown said, thousands of bills in a 2-year session, I think it's entirely appropriate that we have the flexibility to do the people's business. And the gentleman who preceded me at the microphone talked about our having an ability in a 24-hour period to look at bills. When some of us came into this body, technology was nowhere near as advanced as it is today. Everything is in real time. We can access bills from anywhere. As soon as a bill is filed, we can follow bills. I think that this amendment, while really well-intentioned, and on the face of it, the surface of it, may seem like a really thoughtful and good idea, I think it can be limiting. And that's the concern I have. So, to give you an example, the committee that I chaired in the last session, Economic Development and Emerging Technologies, we had a bill that came to our committee very late in the session. It was a home rule bill. It hadn't been sitting there for the better part of a 2-year session. And at the point at which it was filed and came before my committee, we understood that we needed to get the bill moved quickly if there was any chance of getting it through this House and then through the Senate and to the governor before the end of the session. So in an effort to move the bill, we pulled the bill out of committee. It was a home rule. The representative who filed it on behalf of the community that he represented. So we moved it immediately. We moved it quickly. That bill, as it began to move through its paces, I understood was going to be right up against the deadline of the end of session. And 72 hours with respect to just that bill, against all the thousands of other bills that we consider, 72 hours could have been a limiting condition and shouldn't have been. And sometimes this House meets in informal sessions. So I read the gentleman's amendment, and I don't think it appropriately provides safeguards. We can't override or suspend a rule by a 2/3 vote or by unanimous consent if we're not in a formal session. And sometimes that's the way the calendar falls and works. So I think that, while well-intentioned, we should not by rule limit our ability to move legislation. And for that reason, I oppose the amendment. Thank you.
Question comes up. The adoption of the amendment, the chair recognizes Ms. Higgins of Leominster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the members, I rise in support of amendment number 1. And every day that I have the opportunity to come into this chamber, I am thinking of the more than 40,000 Leominster residents that I get to work on behalf of and empower them. And every day, they are shouldering more and more burdens and are struggling more and more. And I think it is a reasonable expectation that we would give them 72 hours and give ourselves 72 hours to be able to look at this legislation. We know that legislation doesn't end up on the House floor in the original form that it started when it was filed. So this gives an extra opportunity for our constituents who are showing up every day and reaching out to us every day to be able to have their voice heard. Thank you for your time.
Question comes on the adoption of the amendment. The chair recognizes Ms. Provost of Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and all of you. I'm going to use the microphone because my voice is not as strong today as that of the gentlelady from Leominster. But like her, I rise in support of Amendment 1. And while I think the points about perhaps exempting home rule petitions, perhaps sick leave banks is well taken and might be a suitable further amendment, I think that the fundamental principle of having at least 72 hours to consider bills is a sound one, which I fully support. I also agree with those who have said that it's not just about us. Certainly, my constituents have always had an activist bent, but since, I'd say, November of 2016, activism in my district has gone into overdrive, and individuals who never perhaps in the past thought too much about the state legislature suddenly stop me at parties and want to know what an informal session is. And the expectation of individuals now, I think, is much greater than it ever has been historically to know what legislation is being considered by this body, not just in concept, but in its details. And while a lot of us have got into the practice of looking over bills very quickly and may have been involved with the genesis of bills, we can't expect the public to have that kind of background, to have the kind of practice at taking a quick read of a bill that some of us might have developed. And I think that having not just an image of openness and transparency, but having rules which make it clear that we are committed to doing the work of the people openly and in view of the people and in a time frame that allows the input of the people as well as the members is exactly what we should stand for in 2019. Thank you.
Question comes on the adoption of the amendment. The chair recognizes Ms. Peisch of Wellesley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the members. I rise in opposition to this amendment. I echo the comments of the gentleman from Chicopee and the gentleman from Cambridge in agreeing that this is a very well-intentioned, but in my maybe too many years here, I have come to appreciate that it is extraordinarily easy to stop a piece of legislation. It is very difficult to get a piece of legislation all the way across the finish line. And if we adopt this rule, I fear that fewer and fewer pieces of good legislation will not make it across the finish line by the end of the session. We are all too familiar with those pieces, those bills that we were all very anxious to see go through this past session that didn't make it. I would underscore the points that have already been made about the opportunities for input all along the way. And I would like to remind us that we are a representative democracy. We are elected to do the work, to do the research, to communicate with our constituents over the course of the session, so that when a bill comes out, and as was mentioned earlier, now that we have the benefits of technology, we can access that bill very quickly. We will have in our minds what the concerns of our constituents are, and we will be able to act. If we have to wait for 3 days when we're in those last few weeks in July, it could be the end of a bill. And I would also just like to point out, for the benefit of our new colleagues who have not had the opportunity to go through a session yet, that it is not that actually unusual for a bill to come out well in advance. So many, many bills come out with more than 24 hours before we take them up. But generally speaking, those times when the bill comes out and we only have the 24 hours, it's because an awful lot of hard work is being done to get a bill to the point where it is ready for us to take it up. So I thank you, and I urge you to reject this amendment. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Heck of Watertown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleagues for all of their thoughtful comments. I will just respond quickly to a few of them. The suggestion has been made by perhaps all three of our colleagues who have risen to oppose this amendment, that it will somehow gum up the works. My response to that is, I think we all in life understand the value of a deadline. I think back to school days. If the assignment was due on Friday, you got it done on Friday. If you had until Tuesday, you waited until Tuesday. I think many of the concerns that have been raised can be dealt with by working to deadlines, by planning and working to deadlines. I think we're entirely capable of that. The point was made that many of these bills have gone through months and months of preparation, input from members, input from stakeholders, consideration by committees, consideration by a second committee. That, in my mind, suggests that there's a lot of time being devoted to the bill, and that if it is kept in mind that the bill needs to be ready by a Friday instead of the following Tuesday or Wednesday, that shouldn't really be a big challenge. And there are, as I mentioned, there is an exception under this amendment to address those instances where it's genuinely necessary to move a bill that has not been made available to us for 72 hours. And I'm certainly open to the suggestion that the gentlelady from Somerville made, that we consider carving out home rule petitions or sick leave banks. I honestly do not believe that anybody in this body, let alone more than a third of the members of this body, would object to a home rule bill or a sick leave bill being taken up on less than 72 hours of notice. I think at the end of the day, what this amendment is about is reaffirming the commitment of this House to allowing each and every member of this House, whether they have been engaged actively in the preparation of the bill or not, to be prepared and cast a knowledgeable vote. And at the same time, to make it possible for members of the public who have busy lives, who have not been following every twist and turn of a bill as it makes its way through this legislative process, give them an opportunity to think about it and weigh in with us. Sure, many people weigh in with us early of the process, but there are lots who don't. And when they hear that a bill's about to pass, or it's teed up to be taken up by the House, that's when they focus on it. That's natural. And if we give them that opportunity, as well as the members that opportunity, and they see that the members have that opportunity, it will only increase the confidence that the public has in the work that we do. And at the end of the day, that is the key to what we do here. We cannot be a successful legislature, we cannot be a successful democracy if we do not have the confidence of the public. I hope the amendment will be adopted.
Comes on the adoption of the amendment. The chair recognizes Mr. Lewis of Framingham.
Members, I rise in support of this amendment. I want to echo the words of my colleagues from Watertown and Somerville. I try to start my week every week at the Senior Center. I go for lunch, I serve food, we have conversations. It's the best way to begin my week right there in the community, right there around the table with constituents who pay attention and who aren't afraid to share their mind in the same way that my grandmother was never afraid to share her mind with me. One of the things we always talk about, though, is, Jack, what do you think's coming up? Today's Monday, you got 2 more days. Wednesday, you're voting. You always go vote on Wednesdays. What are you going to be voting on this week? And I'll be honest, in those moments, I freeze because I don't always know what to tell them. I often will pivot to, well, on NPR I heard X, Y, or Z, or based on what I see coming out of committees, we may or may not take up A, B, or C. And they, being the wonderful people they are, scratch the surface a little bit more. So what you're telling me is you're voting on a complicated piece of legislation that's going to affect all of our lives, and you can't tell me 2 days in advance what you're voting on. And I say, well, don't worry. I have a staff person, I'm part of wonderful caucuses, we dissect every word. By the time I'm in chamber at 1 o'clock on Wednesday, I feel ready. But then they say, Jack, that's great. You might feel ready to make that big decision, but what about us? You expect us at 10 a.m. on Wednesday morning to also tune into NPR, or wait for you to tell us what the bill that's coming out of third reading looks like, and then in the little time we have, get a hold of you to share our thoughts about amendments we'd want you to support or not support, or the overall legislation. And so when I look at this amendment, and yes, as the gentleman from Watertown said, there are tweaks that may have been able to be made, but I think overall, it ensures that I have the time to sit with it, to reflect on it, but maybe more importantly, my constituents who aren't shy. I think I can speak for all of us. Our constituents aren't shy. Technology being what it is, they have an ability to get a hold of us, and I always appreciate that. But if I don't know the verbatim, if I don't know the exact text until hours or sometimes minutes before I'm voting on something, I think I'm doing a disservice to them. So I join my colleagues in urging us to support this amendment.
Also be in a brief recess.
The chair recognizes Ms. Robinson of Framingham.
Thank you very much. No, I'm short. I'm not that short. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the membership. And first of all, thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to have open debate today here on these amendments on the floor. I really do appreciate the movement from leadership towards open public debate. Is deeply appreciated. And I also would like to thank, by extension, the Rules Committee for their hard work on making the rules of the House more inclusive. I'm very grateful, and in particular, I appreciate the work that being done to make the rules gender neutral, a suggestion I believe brought to leadership's attention by my colleague, the gentleman from Scituate. So today, I am proud to stand in support of the amendment proposed by the gentleman from Watertown. And I've spent the past few months working on amendments to make this body more accountable and transparent to the public at large, something that I campaigned on. And I believe that this amendment today being proposed has always been a key component of that. In my hometown of Framingham, we recently embarked on a very massive shift from a town to a city changing the way that our residents are governed. Our residents are paying attention now. Over that first year, we've heard over and over again that transparency is required at the local, state, and federal levels. Now, I get that transparency is an opaque term. It means something different to each person, and we throw it around a great deal without necessarily assigning a whole lot of meaning to it. So, for me, in this setting here in the House, I see transparency as an opportunity for the public at large to engage in the legislative process. The more that we give our constituents a chance to understand what's being contemplated in the legislature, the better they can inform our decisions. Since November, I've heard from many wonderful people here inside the legislature and wise and experienced members to be in district and to listen. Support for this amendment comes as a result of listening and listening to my constituents every single day. They want to be able to understand what I'm working on. I go to the YMCA to exercise class and they ask me, can you explain how a bill becomes a law? And it takes a little bit longer than usually the course of the warm-up, I promise that. But they want to be able to weigh in. People who have not been engaged whatsoever are paying attention, be it because of Brett Kavanaugh, because of the president, any number of different reasons, and they're paying attention to what's going on at the state level. They want to be able to ask experts to weigh in on bills, as do I. And they want to be able to think through all the unintended consequences associated with supporting a bill, as do I. They're demanding more time to read, digest, and advocate on bills, and I want to be responsive. That's my job. It's my responsibility to be responsive to my constituents. So to me, having 72 hours to read the bills before they come to the House floor allows for the time to do all of that legwork, plus to utilize tools such as online polls, which I know several members here use, in order to better engage our constituents. And look, I'm here doing my maiden speech today, and I get it. People have said that a maiden speech is meant to be on something that's important. This is important. I think it's very important that we care deeply about our constituents and about how the House operates. I think that this is incredibly important, and in particular, this amendment is important. To me, my interpretation of representative democracy, as envisioned by our forefathers, painted so lovely here, and they're all forefathers, there aren't any women, requires public participation. So I support this amendment because it allows for more time for thoughtful engagement from the people that we represent, and I appreciate your consideration and urge your support on Amendment 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Ms. O'Connell of Taunton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the members. We've heard some examples of why this amendment should not be passed, but I want to give an example of why it should be passed. Several years ago, we were debating a bill that was going to put yet more mandates on our school systems, and it came up very quickly and suddenly, and so I called my superintendent to ask her if this was okay with her. And the bill had, of course, gone through the process, but some of their concerns were not addressed along the way. And they had no idea that this bill was coming to the floor, and they were very concerned about it. So here they were, trying to run our school systems, had to drop everything that they were doing in the middle of the day so that they could come and talk and have conversations and work on this bill so that it wouldn't be a further burden on our school systems. When bills go through the process, they often come out of House Ways and Means very differently than they went in. And some of these bills are very voluminous and complex, and it takes more than 24 hours to go through them to truly understand what they mean and to let people like our superintendents, our educators, and many other groups understand what they mean and how it's going to affect their lives, their jobs, their communities. Massachusetts does not have a great mark in transparency. We have a very low grade. I think passing this will show our commitment to transparency. And I do hope that the amendment is adopted, Mr. Speaker.
Question. On the adoption of the amendment, the chair recognizes Mr. Markey of Dartmouth.
You know, this is a unique position for me to be in, and I get that. But this is an amendment that, in principle, I think we should seriously consider. And the reason why is because, as we even heard today in caucus, I describe it as a new world disorder. And I think people have a genuine distrust of government for a variety of reasons. And I think the idea is that allow people the opportunity to participate more fully is something that is healthy for everybody. Whether you are a progressive, whether you are a conservative, whether you are what I would consider myself a moderate, it is a way in which the public can become more educated, but I think more importantly, it is a way in which we can become better legislators. We will have to prepare better. We will have to do things that maybe some of us have not done in the past. And I think that this type of amendment, whether it be to extend the period out to 72 hours or some period of time, the concept, I believe, is a good one. And I think that ultimately the people who benefit are all of us, that we now we will not have someone saying to us, you did that too quickly. It will take away the argument, but I believe all of us are always prepared when we take a vote. But I think we can always be better prepared. As a trial lawyer, there isn't a time in which I do not feel that I was never prepared for a trial. But when I sit down after a closing argument, there isn't a trial that I've ever done where I don't feel like I could have done a better job. I think this allows for that to happen, this concept of more time, and I hope and I support the amendment. Thank you.
Roll call having been ordered. Roll call will be called forthwith and remain open for 3 minutes. Court officer will notify the members that a roll call is in progress and will remain open for 3 minutes. Time for voting has expired. The clerk will display the tally. 55 in the affirmative, 101 in the negative. The amendment is not adopted. House will be in a brief recess.